Before Heaven's Gate, before the Manson family, the single largest deliberate loss of American life happened 500 miles away from the closest American border, in a remote jungle in Guyana, where the cult leader Jim Jones in the People's Temple committed the largest mass suicide in recent history. Jim Jones was born May 13, 1931, to James and Lynetta Jones. During his infancy, the family was trapped in severe poverty due to the Great Depression that was engulfing all of America, forcing his family to travel all over the state to find decent food and shelter. The Joneses finally settled in Lynn, Indiana, where Jones grew up going to church and even made a few friends, but mostly being known as a strange kid. Some family and friends allege that Jones would hold funerals for his pets and that he even stabbed a cat once, but Jones mostly ignored the name-calling and focused on high school. During his academic years, he was an avid reader of Adolf Hitler and Karl Marx, ingraining a radical mindset from a young age. He graduated with honors in 1948. The America that a young Jim Jones had grown up in, and the America that a now lonely 20-year-old Jim Jones found himself in, were polar opposites. Between a childhood living in a shack to a booming post-war economy, his 20s saw a country obsessed with spending and consuming.
Listen, help me out, will you? Harold hates my coffee. What kind do you use? Instant Folgers. Instant Folgers? Tastes good as fresh perked.
Jones disapproved of all of this, opting instead for a life of necessity and community, headed by a communist government. In 1951, Jones joined the Communist Party of Indiana and wanted to introduce more people to the teachings of communism. But at the time, the anti-communist sentiment in America was at an all-time high.
In recognizing a communist, physical appearance counts for nothing. If he openly declares himself to be a communist, we take his word for it. If a person consistently reads and advocates the views expressed in a communist publication, he may be a communist.
Senator Joseph McCarthy's anti-communist politics was making it very difficult and dangerous for anyone to identify as a communist.
One communist on the faculty of one university is one communist too many. And even if there were only one communist in the State Department, even if there were only one communist in the State Department, that would still be one communist too many.
Senator McCarthy was a stern opponent of socialism and would regularly use smear tactics to ruin the public reputation of anyone who identified as a communist from all parts of America. This practice was later coined McCarthyism.
The next step of your indoctrination.
After experiencing some first-hand McCarthy-esque harassment outside a courthouse, Jim Jones became so frustrated with the government's scheme of destroying communists in America that he started his own scheme.
So on down the road, I became even more alienated by that event. I decided, how can I demonstrate my Marxism? The thought was, infiltrate the church.
Even though Jones was an open communist, he managed to become a student pastor at a local Methodist church, where his charismatic speaking earned him a small following.
It really was brought to my attention by a very kindly, and I pause because of, again, feeling that it can reflect on others, a man who had a great deal of conscience that seemed to be compatible to my views, who was a church administrator of a denomination, and he encouraged me to think about being a pastor, and so I did. Very quickly did.
But Jim Jones soon left the church after it was revealed that they refused a mixed-race congregation. Jones decided that he had bigger sights. In 1956, he bought his own church building and organized a large convention featuring revered religious figures to attract more people to what soon would be his own church, and named it Wings of Deliverance, before later renaming it to People's Temple Full Gospel Church. To allow more people to flock to his message, Jones would integrate his extremist beliefs into a form of religion, causing people to commit themselves fully to his ideals, no matter how unusual they were. He began performing healing sessions and clairvoyant revelations and ended up attracting the attention of many spiritualists.
Edie? Are your fingers numb? In your right hand. Reach the fingers out that are bothering you. Now, is the pain gone?
Jones had also preached racial desegregation, opening his church to members of any ethnic group, also helping racially integrate other churches, restaurants, police departments, and theaters. At the time, Jones seemed like a kind and progressive man, and over the years, more and more people started joining the church. By the 1970s, it had amassed around 3,000 members. In the early 1970s, Jones relocated his church from Indianapolis to San Francisco, claiming that Indianapolis was not progressive enough to house his people. He also opened up a temple in Los Angeles. Growing as a religious icon in California, Jones would receive support from public officials and politicians at the time, like Governor Jerry Brown, columnist Herb Caen, and even the Vice President Walter Mondale for his charitable efforts and progressive teachings. As the year progressed, Jones's once high public opinion would begin to crumble, causing a shift in the minds of the general population. After opening up his church in multiple locations across California and an increase of devoted members, the larger public began growing increasingly critical of Jones and his followers. With the anti-communist sentiment growing in the United States, several newspapers started criticizing Jones and the People's Temple. Rumors were spreading about his strict leadership style and his questionable relationship with some of the temple's members. Former members of the People's Temple even accused Jones of forcing them to sell their houses and belongings to raise money for the group. The group was seemingly becoming more of a cult than a harmless church. Realizing that he was becoming more and more unpopular among the American public, Jones began looking for a way to escape the American media. He decided his best course of action was to re-establish his church in another country, to be able to preach his morals without the scrutiny of the media. And because his followers were so devoted to Jones, they decided to move with him. After looking at multiple places like Canada, Barbados, and Trinidad, Jones settled on Guyana. With the socialist politics of Guyana, it seemed like the perfect place to settle his now completely devoted followers. The Guyanese government subsequently welcomed them into the country because at the time, the disputed border between Venezuela and Guyana was becoming an increasingly dangerous problem. With the risk of an attack looming over either nation, the Guyanese government reasoned that situating Americans near the disputed border would lower the chances of an attack. Nevertheless, Jones and hundreds of his followers started flowing through the border to settle into the Guyanese capital of Georgetown. After relocating, they subsequently renamed their group to the People's Temple Agricultural Project, informally known as Jonestown.
Tommy's come such a long way, he's not afraid of anything.
Jones would portray Jonestown as a utopia or a socialist paradise, away from all the pressures of the American media. What the members of the group did not know, however, was that Jones had restricted their visas, effectively barring any of them from leaving the country and returning back to their lives in America. By curtailing their visas, everyone became completely reliant on Jones for everything, including news of the outside, emotional and spiritual support, as well as basic everyday needs, thus allowing him to become the only channel of knowledge in their completely isolated society.
Rivers meeting new people, which will soon be our hope line.
Life in Jonestown was bleak. Jones would force his followers to watch Soviet propaganda documentaries and would give lectures about the revolution and alliances with the Soviet. An ex-cult member, Deborah Layton Blakey, recalls that frequently, at temple meetings, Jones would talk non-stop for hours. At various times, he claimed that he was the reincarnation of either Lenin, Jesus Christ, or one of the variety of other religious or political figures. Members would work 6 days a week with near 12-hour shifts every day, with only an hour for lunch. Even then, much of the food needed to be imported, and on some days, the only thing that would be served was rice and beans.
We're just getting ready to leave. These are potato chips made from plantain, and they're more delicious. They're a combination of a potato chip and a French fry. And radishes, You don't know what you're missing down here? They make their own buns and hamburgers and the leafy green vegetables. By the way, we just won first prize from the national government of Guyana for our leafy green vegetables. Here are the people at the table eating an afternoon snack. You see Pepsi-Cola's here for 3 cents, American money. That sounds appetizing, doesn't it? I can't get anybody to go home with me.
The members, including Jones, lived in small communal houses woven from truly palm. Couples would even surrender their children to communal care, sometimes only being able to see them briefly at night. Jonestown was surrounded by armed guards, patrolling the area to enforce rules. If a member was caught trying to escape, they'd be injected with various drugs as part of an extended care unit. In fact, Jonestown contained thousands of doses of depressants, enough to inject the entire population of Jonestown hundreds of times. Although, even with all of these seemingly horrible rules, when interviewed by the American Embassy, none of the 75 people questioned said that they wanted to leave Jonestown.
Peaceful and productive place in which to live. Are you happy here?
Oh, I should say I am. I've never been any happier in my life.
You want to stay?
Definitely. I certainly do.
And you girls, what about you?
I love staying here. I'm getting trained in obstetrics. I'm laboratory technician. I find my work here very fulfilling. I love it here.
I like this place much better, and I won't want to go back there. I just like to be here with the rest of my friends and stuff.
You're happy here?
I'm very happy here. It's the best place I've ever been.
And you?
I wouldn't want to leave here because I have, it's really nice here, and I have, got a good education here, and got a lot of friends here. I like it here a lot.
Some people have said they couldn't leave if they wanted to. Do you think you could?
Yeah, if I really wanted to, I'm free to go. If I was really wanted to, I'll be able to free to go.
Every few nights, events nicknamed White Night rehearsals would be performed. During these nights, Jones would line up the members and give them a drink, usually being punch or Kool-Aid. After the members drank the liquid, Jones would claim that the drink was actually poison, and they would die in 45 minutes. But as the name White Night Rehearsal suggests, the poison wasn't real.
Jim started talking about our cause, and he said, this punch is going to be passed out to everybody here. We all drank our punch, and then, he said, you just drank poison. And we will all die right here in the church together as one. The women were just screaming, oh no, my baby, my baby. And others just sat there. And all of a sudden Jim says, that wasn't poison you drank.
By this time, Jones had started noticing that some people were expressing thoughts of leaving Jonestown. To counteract the sentiment, he taught his followers to turn in anyone who told them they wanted to leave, allowing members to compete in their level of devotion and fear punishment at any time. Forcing his followers to doubt each other and scheme against each other only elevated their reliance on Jones and increased his perceived position amongst them.
A father would turn in a son, a husband would turn in a wife, a small child would turn in a parent. There was no freedom to express to one another what was going on because everything was suspect. The most forbidden thing to express was to leave.
He said, I really want to get away from here, and by Christmas I will be gone.
By Christmas, do you want to be gone?
Yeah, well,
By Christmas, do you want to be gone? By Christmas, do you want to be gone?
I would ask you, could I go home to make a trip to see my people?
I have the power to send you home by Christmas, but it's not on Trans World Airlines. It's blasphemy. It's blasphemy to talk about going back when you have not been given any approval. Do you want to go home? Oh. Well, then be seated and shut your mouth and don't be in my face anymore.
Back in America, accusations of illegal activity occurring at Jonestown were starting to get serious. Relatives of People's Temple members and ex-members were participating in meetings, planning on how to bring the questionable actions of Jim Jones to light. Together, the group named themselves Concerned Relatives. At first, they engaged in letter-writing campaigns to the U.S. Secretary of State and even traveled to Washington, D.C. to attempt to spark an investigation. In 1978, the group handed out a packet of documents outlining the illegal activity happening in Jonestown, titled Accusations of Human Rights Violations by Reverend James Warren Jones, to members of the press and members of the Congress.
Al and Jeannie Mills operate the Human Freedom Center where today's gathering was held. Although Mills left the People's Temple in November 1975, he has received a number of threats in the past 3 years. He explains his feelings about the People's Temple.
To leave People's Temple, you had to decide you'd rather die than continue to go there and see the beatings and the mistreatment of people, the rip-off of senior black people from their homes, all their property. You had to decide that you were ready to die when you left the church.
Jones, in retaliation, hired an attorney, Mark Lane, to try to prove that the CIA, the FBI, and the U.S. Post Office was trying to fabricate an elaborate conspiracy against him.
Attorney Mark Lane, who went to Jonestown on an independent investigation, told me on October 3rd that no one is being held by the People's Temple against his will.
They're told that this person wants to leave. The American embassy and the first consul, who I believe is related to the Central Intelligence Agency, goes there with a car, has an individual meeting with the individual involved, and says, and they've repeated this to me, both the embassy and the people involved, here's a car, there's no one to stop you. If you like, come in the car, we will drive you back, we have a plane waiting, we'll fly you to Georgetown, there's a ticket, and we'll pay for your flight right back to your home, and no one can stop us. Do you want to go? And they say, no, I don't want to go.
Needless to say, these claims were unfounded. But on the other side, the concerned relatives were making significant progress. In fact, Leo Ryan, a U.S. representative, announced that he would visit Jonestown and investigate the practices of Jones and the group. So, on November 14th, 1978, Leo Ryan, along with a group of around 20 people, including news reporters, photographers, and members of the concerned relatives, flew to Guyana's capital, Georgetown. Upon arrival into Georgetown, another flight was needed to reach Jonestown, and because of the aircraft's seating limitations, only a limited number of people could be flown to the location. Upon arrival, Jones initially only allowed Leo Ryan and 3 others to enter Jonestown, while the rest of the group would be welcomed in after sunset. Upon finally arriving at Jonestown, the group was welcomed with dinner and entertainment, and Jones even agreed to speak with news reporters on camera.
I think that all of you know that I'm here to find out more about questions that have been raised about your operation here. But I can tell you right now that from the few conversations I've had with some of the folks here already this evening, that whatever the comments are, there are some people here who believe that this is the best thing that ever happened to them in their whole life.
Everything seemed to be going well, but under the surface, Jones was losing grip and his paranoia was setting in. It was later revealed and confirmed that Jones had run rehearsals on how to try and convince Ryan that nothing was wrong. But apparently, Jones didn't pay enough attention to his followers that night, because at 2:15 p.m. on the same day, Vernon Gosney and Monica Bagby, 2 cult members, passed NBC reporter Don Harris a note.
When Congressman Ryan came, I wanted to pass him a note. It said, help us get out of Jonestown. When one of the reporters was walking around towards the edge of the pavilion, I stuck the note in a fold of his arm and it fell to the ground. And so I picked up the note and I gave it back to him. I said, you dropped something. And this little boy about 9 years old started saying, he passed a note, he passed a note.
Don Harris, who was the NBC reporter, came up to me and Congressman Ryan and handed us these 2 notes from people that wanted to leave. So at that point, we knew that something was very, very wrong.
On the following day, Harris confronted Jones about the note.
Last night, someone came and passed me this note.
He's the one that I'm just talking about. Yeah, this is the man that wants to leave his son here.
Doesn't it concern you, though, that this man, for whatever reason, one of the people in your group...
People play games, friend. They lie. What can I do about liars? Are you people going to leave us? I just beg you, please leave us. Bill, we will bother nobody. Anybody wants to get out of here can get out of here. We have no problem about getting out of here. They come and go all the time. I don't know what kind of game. People like publicity. Some people do. I don't.
The following day, a violent rainstorm started pouring into Jonestown. During the downpour, more members started changing their minds. Reporters were told by several members that they wanted to leave Jonestown.
Now, do I both understand you to say that you both want to leave Jonestown on this date, November 18, 1978?
And as the number of defectors began to grow, it became more and more chaotic. Before Ryan and the delegation knew it, the number of people who wanted to leave Jonestown grew to about 20 people. The delegation was initially scheduled to be picked up by a 19-passenger aircraft, but with the additional members, they needed a second one. The U.S. Embassy swiftly arranged for a second plane, a 6-passenger Cessna that was scheduled to arrive around 4:30 p.m. With the transportation prepared, the delegation and the defectors started departing from Jonestown in a truck. Leo Ryan and another official, Dwyer, stayed behind to see if there were any additional defectors. Eventually, a few others joined them to defect from Jonestown, but members were surprised when one person in particular, Larry Layton, said he wanted to defect. Layton was an extremely loyal Templar member, and it seemed strange that he was demanding to join the group and leave Jonestown. Many other Temple members voiced their suspicions on Layton's intentions, but Ryan and Dwyer ultimately let him join. While the truck was about to depart, a Temple member, presumably angry that too many people were leaving, pulled out a knife and tried to stab Leo Ryan. But before he could do so, other members wrestled him to the ground, disarming him of his weapon. This, along with growing tensions between the delegation and the Temple members, signaled that Ryan and his crew should begin to leave immediately. They arrived at Port Kaituma airstrip, where the planes were supposed to pick them up, but to Ryan's surprise, neither of the planes had shown up. After waiting around half an hour, the planes finally arrived and the delegation wasted no time boarding the plane. The 6-passenger Cessna was the first aircraft that was set up for takeoff, and while the aircraft taxied to the far end of the airstrip, Larry Layton, the Temple loyalist, took out a handgun and started shooting at random inside the plane. In his rampage, he wounded Bagby and Gosney, 2 Temple members, and reportedly had tried to kill a third, but was ultimately disarmed. Around the same time, while the passengers were trying to get on the second plane, a tractor with a trailer attached drove up to the aircraft, parking in a way that would block the group from running into the forest. The delegation mostly ignored the truck, their main focus being trying to board the plane. But as the truck came to a stop, around 9 Temple members hopped out of the trailer and started shooting at the plane with shotguns, handguns, and rifles. An NBC reporter that was filming at the time dropped the camera and recorded these images. At least 2 shooters circled the plane on foot, shooting multiple officials and Temple members at point-blank range. Ultimately, Bob Brown, the man who recorded the video, was killed, along with Greg Robinson, a photographer, Don Harris, an NBC reporter, Congressman Leo Ryan, and Temple defector Patricia Parks. After the shooting had stopped and the shooters had left, the pilots and co-pilots of both planes boarded the Cessna and flew to Georgetown, leaving the injured members on the airstrip. Meanwhile, back at Jonestown, most members were unaware that a shooting had just occurred and were told that everything was fine and that they should stay in their homes. But behind this constant reassurance was a sinister plan. Jones and other aides were preparing a large tub of grape flavor aid laced with Valium, chloral hydrate, cyanide, and Phenergan. enough to kill an adult male in 30 minutes. After finishing the mixture, Jones called all temple members to join him in the pavilion, the usual place for group meetings. When they arrived, Jones told them all to drink the Flavor Aid mixture and explained that by drinking this mixture, they would be committing what he called revolutionary suicide. At the same time, Jones started recording the ordeal as it was taking place in a 44-minute video now nicknamed the Death Tape.
Time immemorial, no man takes my life from me, I lay my life down. So to sit here and wait for the catastrophe that's going to happen on that airplane, it's going to be a catastrophe. Almost happened here. Almost happened. The congressman was nearly killed here. But you can't steal people's children. You can't take off with people's children without expecting a violent reaction. Because what's going to happen here in a matter of a few minutes is that one of those people on that plane is going to shoot the pilot. I know that. I didn't plan it, but I know it's going to happen. They're going to shoot that pilot, and down comes that plane into the jungle. And we had better not have any of our children left when it's over, because they'll parachute in here on us. And step over quietly, because we are not committing suicide. It's a revolutionary act. We can't go back. They won't leave us alone. They're now going back to tell more lies, which means more congressmen, and there's no way we can survive. 1,200 people's lives in my hands, and I certainly don't want your life in my hand, but I'm going to tell you, Christine, without me, life has no meaning. I'm the best friend you'll ever have. I can't separate myself from your actions or his actions. If you'd done something wrong, I'd stand with you. If they wanted to come and get you, they'd have to take me.
We're all ready to go. If you tell us we have to give our lives now, we're ready. I'm pretty sure all the rest of the sisters and brothers are with me.
For months I've tried to keep this thing from happening, but I now see it's the will of sovereign being that this happened to us. That we lay down our lives in protest against what's being done. That we lay down our lives to protest in what's being done. The criminality of people, the cruelty of people. Who walked out of here today? Did you notice who walked out? Mostly white people. Mostly white people walked. I'm so grateful for the ones that didn't, those who knew who they are. But there's no point. There's no point to this. We are born before our time.
18 minutes into the tape, the shooters who ambushed the delegation returned to Jonestown and informed Jones that the congressman was murdered.
Yes, my love.
At one time, I felt just like Christine felt. But after today, I don't feel anything because the biggest majority of the people that left here were white. And I know it really hurt my heart because
broke your heart, didn't it?
It broke my heart to think that all of these years that these white people have been with us and they're not a part of us. So we might as well end it now because I don't see...
Talking, the congressman has been murdered. It's all over, all over. What a legacy, what a legacy. But the Red Brigade's the only ones that ever made any sense anyway. They invaded our privacy, they came into our home, they followed us 6,000 miles away. The Red Brigade showed them justice. The congressman's dead. Please get us some medication. It's simple, there's no convulsions with it, it's just simple, just please get it. Before it's too late, the GDF will be here. I tell you, get moving, get moving, get moving. Don't be afraid to die. If these people land out here, they'll torture some of our children here. They'll torture our people, they'll torture our seniors. We cannot have this. Are you going to separate yourself from whoever shot the congressman? I don't know who shot him.
speak her piece, and those had a right to go, and they had a right to... How many are dead? Oh, God Almighty, God Almighty. Patty Parks is dead.
You and the others to endure long enough in a safe place to write about the goodness of Jim Jones?
I don't know how in the world they're ever going to write about us. It's just too late. It's too late. The congressman's dead. The congressman today's dead. Many of our traitors are dead. They're all laying out there dead. I didn't, but my people did.
They aren't crying from pain. It's just a little bitter tasting, but they're not crying out of any pain.
Of the children here, a great deal because of Jim Jones. And the way the children are laying there now, I'd rather see them lay like that than to see them have to die like the Jews did, which was pitiful anyhow. And I'd just like to thank Dad for giving us life and also death. And I appreciate the fact the way our children are going. Because like Dad said, when they come in, what they're going to do to our children, they're going to massacre our children. And also the ones that they take captured, they're going to just let them grow up and be dummies like they want them to be, and not grow up to be associates like the one and only Jim Jones. They took us and put us in chains, and that's nothing. There's no comparison to that, to this. They robbed us of our land, and they've taken us and driven us, and we tried to find ourselves. We tried to find a new beginning, but it's too late. You can't separate yourself from your brother and your sister. No way I'm going to do it. I refuse. I don't know who fired the shot. I don't know who killed the congressman. But as far as I'm concerned, I killed him. You understand what I'm saying? I killed him. Die with respect. Die with a degree of dignity. Lay down your life with dignity. Don't lay down with tears and agony. There's nothing to death. It's like Max said. It's just stepping over into another plane. Don't be this way. Stop this hysterics. This is not the way for people who are socialists, communists to die. No way for us to die. We must die with some dignity. Please, keep your emotions down. Keep your emotions down. Children, it will not hurt if you'll be quiet. If you'll be quiet. Death is, I tell you, I don't care how many screams you hear. I don't care how many anguished cries. Death is 1,000,000 times preferable to 10 more days of this life. If you knew what was ahead of you, you'd be glad to be stepping over tonight.
It is unclear if any members initially thought that this was just another White Night rehearsal, but even if members wanted to run away, the pavilion was surrounded by armed guards. In the recording, Jones used many techniques to convince people to follow his instructions. First, he frames the act of committing suicide as the only possible option in the current circumstances. One cult member, Christine Miller, even suggests an alternative, but was immediately shot down by Jones.
Well, I said let's make an airlift to Russia. That's what I say. I don't think nothing is impossible.
Well, how are we going to
believe it?
How are you going to airlift to Russia?
Well, I thought they said if we got in an emergency, they gave you a code to let them know.
No, they did. They gave us the code that they'd let us know of an issue, not us create an issue. There's no, Christine, it's not worth living like this. Not worth living like this.
I think that there were too few who left for 1,200 people to give them their lives for those people that left.
You know how many left?
20 odd. That's a small
20 odd.
Compared to what's here.
20 odd. But what's going to happen when they don't leave?
You mean the people here?
Yeah, what's going to happen to us when they don't leave, when they get on the plane and the plane goes down?
I don't think it'll go down.
You don't think it'll go down? I wish I could tell you were right, but I'm right.
Jones also frames the act of committing suicide as finally being at peace and escaping the hellish world he claimed they were living in.
I said I'm afraid to die.
I don't think you are.
I don't think you are. But I look at our babies and I think they deserve to live.
I agree.
You know? But also they deserve, what's more, they deserve peace.
We all came here for peace.
And have we had it?
No.
I tried to give it to you. I've laid down my life practically. I've practically died every day to give you peace, and you've still not had any peace. You look better than I've seen you in a long while, but it's still not the kind of peace that I wanted to give you.
As the temple members finished taking the poison, the guards of the temple were called in to do the same. After the ordeal, Jones was found deceased with a gunshot wound to the head, consistent with being self-inflicted. However, some people in Jonestown survived. On the day of the mass suicide, two lawyers, Mark Lane and Charles Gary, who were supposed to be representing some of the temple members, had previously been told that some of the members had developed grudges against them. In response, Lane and Gary asked to be escorted to a guest house in Jonestown, typically used to house visitors. According to them, on the day of the suicide, they convinced two guards at the house to let them go. After escaping from the house, Lane and Gary fled into the jungle to try to get to Port Kaituma, where at the time, the shooting was still taking place. They hid in the jungle until it was all over. Several temple members managed to escape too. Stanley Clayton, only 25 years old at the time, was in the pavilion when the mass suicide was taking place. He initially thought that it was just another white night rehearsal, but when he saw that the guards were also taking the kitchen staff into the pavilion, he grew suspicious, because kitchen staff usually weren't invited to the temple meetings. When he arrived at the pavilion, his suspicions were justified, and after seeing his mother and girlfriend commit suicide, he told a guard that he wanted to say goodbye to some of his friends before dying. The guard agreed, and when they weren't looking, Clayton made a run for it into the forest.
So all the babies were laid out there dead?
Yes.
What about people who didn't want to die and they saw all this going on?
People that didn't want to die, I would say a lot of people didn't want to die. They were just sitting there, frightened, afraid. Jim Jones was continually saying, hurry, hurry, we must all do this, we must all die, we must die with dignity.
Die with respect, die with a degree of dignity. Lay down your life with dignity, don't lay down with tears and agony. Hurry, hurry, my children, hurry.
Only thing I was trying to do was trying to figure a way out of it, because I never believed in taking my life. I never believed that suicide.
How did you get out of it?
I managed to slip through one of the guards.
Grover Davis, a 79-year-old temple member who was hard of hearing at the time, missed the announcement to go to the pavilion, and so he stayed inside his home. After he realized that a mass suicide was taking place, he laid down in a ditch and pretended to be dead until the ordeal had ended. Another temple member, Catherine Hyacinth Edwards, who was 76 at the time, hid under her bed when she heard the announcement. She slept there until 7 a.m. the next morning. Waking up, she saw the land surrounding her shack littered with bodies, including her sister and other relatives. She was the only living person that was in Jonestown when Guyanese troops arrived. Almost 22 hours after the shooting, a Guyanese government plane arrived to evacuate the injured members of the delegation that were left on the airstrip. Most of them spent the night at Port Kaituma Cafe, while the more critically injured spent the night at a tent near the airstrip. Initially, there was only one medical doctor to examine the scene, Dr. C. Leslie Mutu. He visually examined over 200 bodies, later claiming that at least 70 of them had needle marks. Plastic cups and syringes were found littered around the bodies. Letters were also discovered near the bodies of some victims, presumably written as suicide notes. A typewritten note from Marceline Jones, a temple member, reads, "I, Marceline Jones, leave all bank assets in my name to the Communist Party of the USSR. For anyone who finds this letter, please honor this request as it is most important to myself and my husband, James W. Jones." Another temple member, Annie Moore, left a handwritten note that attempts to explain that Jonestown wasn't a bad place and that Jones was a good person, before ending it with the phrase, "We died because you would not let us live in peace." In total, 909 people died in the Jonestown Massacre, but the survivor count is disputed. It could range anywhere from 6 to 87. The bodies of the temple members were collected by the United States military in Guyana and transported back to America. Initially, the American government had tried to have the bodies buried in Guyana, but the Guyanese government declined, and the families of the loved ones also wanted to see their relatives come home. So the government ended up having to airlift all 900 bodies back to America. The bodies finally arrived at the Dover Air Force Base in Delaware, a base that had previously been used to process the victims of the Tenerife airport disaster, the deadliest airplane crash in history. Due to the sheer amount of bodies found in Jonestown, some corpses were put in the same case to be airlifted to America. In one instance, 490 bodies needed to fit in only 267 cases to speed up the process. The workers at the Air Force Base in Delaware were tasked with fingerprinting, identifying, and processing the bodies. Many of them subsequently developed PTSD from the grueling work. But because this was the late 1970s, not much was known about PTSD. It was only known to come from military experience, and was still referred to as shell shock. But a subsequent study that was done that focused on the effect of secondary disaster victims helped give insight on how complex the issue really was. By April of the following year, 1979, more than 300 of the 900 bodies had been claimed by family members and relatives of the victims. But around 500 bodies still remained unidentified, 200 of them being decomposed past the point of identification. Even if bodies were identified or not, cemeteries were reluctant to bury their remains, in fear that it would attract Jonestown sympathizers. But eventually, a cemetery in Oakland agreed to bury the remains of hundreds of victims in a mass grave. Over time, the massacre made its way into mainstream media, popularizing the phrase, "Don't drink the Kool-Aid," referring to the great flavor aid that was used to kill the citizens of Jonestown. The phrase became an idiom for the act of blind obedience, typically used in a political context.
Troubling, because now it's no longer even strategic. It is, you're drinking your own Kool-Aid in a way that I think is
I hear about this. Now, maybe Mr. Trump and his near followers, because it's almost like, Jim Jones, drink the Kool-Aid and don't really think about anything. Just drink the Kool-Aid.
Although the phrase has been diluted to a simple pop culture reference, the history of it holds a heavy weight. With over 900 dead, 1/3 of them being children, the Jonestown Massacre will continue to be the most devastating mass murder-suicide in American history.